All right. Well, I think let's go ahead and get started here for those who have joined. Welcome. My name is Brian Gibson, and I'm the music education editor here at GIA Publications. And I'm very excited to welcome all of the attendees and panelists for this conversation today. I'm going to introduce Gregory Gentry, who will be moderating the discussion, and I will turn it over to him and let him introduce the panelists. But just as a quick introduction, for Gregory, he was the director of choirs at University of Alabama, Arizona State University, and the University of Colorado, as well as a proud student of George Lynn and Eve Ely. And I heard actually from Alec just the other day, Gregory, that you're a visiting professor down at University of Miami for this year. So that's great to hear as well.
And
Uh,
also University of Mary. I'm working with a college up in Bismarck, North Dakota.
Excellent. I didn't know that. That's great to hear as well. For those of you who are
Oh,
joining
yeah.
as participants, everybody's going to be shown on the screen, but I've got our panelists spotlighted, so you'll be able to see their screens bigger. It looks like most folks have themselves muted, and that's great. If there's ever an interactive time, you're welcome to unmute yourself for that. And I think Gregory will kind of give the cue there. Um, but otherwise, with that, I will turn it over to Gregory to get things started, and I will just kind of be hanging out in the background if there's any technical issues or any need for me. So with that, Gregory, I'll let you have it.
Well, thank you, Brian. That's really kind for the introduction. We appreciate it. For the those of you that are in the audience today, if you would kindly just remember to stay muted, and if you have a question, and I want you to feel free to ask questions. If you can use the raise hand function, Anna will be watching and monitoring and bringing your question forward. I told Ann Howard Jones that I would ask if you don't mind un turn your video on so that she can see you, so we can be as much in person as this will allow. You don't have to, but it would be nice to see your face. But all that being said, I am Dr. Gregory Gentry, and I'm the compiler and co-author of this GIA book called In Search of Inspiration. And Anna, who is here, Wheeler Gentry, is the editor of the book, and she co-authored and wrote the first chapter. The biography, her chapter is a biography of George Lynn, the former director of Westminster Choir College and a protege of John Finley Williamson. And Anna also has researched and she wrote the accompanying biographies for each of the subjects in the book that creates a thread, a through line, a consistency so that they all read in a similar fashion. And she worked towards a historical versus a CV kind of biography. So we knew more about their life. Today we're joined with two featured individuals, Dr. Ann Howard Jones and Dr. Hilary Apfelstadt. And we're also pleased that Dr. Stephen Futrell, who interviewed Paris Rutherford, is with us today. And for you to understand how this book came about, I just wanted to share with you briefly that in the fall of 2015, we had a centenary for George Lynn, a celebration of his 100 years since his birth. And the symposium featured George Lynn's music. We had student forums about Lynn, student performances, and we had several guest lecturers that came, including a keynote speech by George Lynn, who was a former student by Eve Ely, who was a former student of George Lynn. And with that, the event reminded me that I sat in my Honda Prelude after voice lessons with George Lynn, and he would mention these names like Eugene Ormandy. And well, I knew Leonard Bernstein. I didn't know Ormandy at the time, Stokowski, and many, many others. And so I kept hearing about these ancestral, fantastic musicians that he had worked with. I think he planted the seed that understanding where we came from is as important as knowing where we're going. And so with that, when I got to this part of my career, I picked out a diverse group of choral pioneers and targeted them to see if they would be willing to, and I had interacted with many of them, share their life story with us in an interview in the line of thinking that Carol Glenn's book was about, called In Quest of Answers. I did a different format, but that's really part of the thought behind that groundbreaking book. So in essence, you should know the principle of this was George Lynn used to say to me that a good teacher doesn't teach much. They know how to ask the one right question. And with that, if it's the right question, students will provide many different answers. And so that's what I tried to do, was come up with 15 very simple questions that would allow plenty of room for our interviewed subjects to expand on their life, their history, their story, and what they had hoped and want to hope for the future of choral music. And to that, I'm sad to say that four of the choral pioneers have passed away already since the publication of the book in 2021 and the interviews that took place in 2018. They are George Umberson, the director of School of Music, Arizona State University, and ACDA member, Joseph Lemmerfeld, which most of us probably know, Paris Rutherford, a vocal jazz expert, and Dr. Peter Bagley. To that, I wanted to say that Dr. Bagley, the professor emeritus of the University of Connecticut, was interviewed by Paul Thompson. Paul Thompson's the director of choirs at Ripon in Wisconsin now, and he joined us, Dr. Bagley, that is, joined us at CU to headline for the Madrigal Festival that was 54 years in the making and continuous every year since Walter Collins. And in that, Dr. Bagley selected a piece of music that was The Wind of Whalum, Lily of the Valley. But he said, I want to do something different, Greg. I want to feature the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech over the top of it. And so I wanted to share a little bit more about what inspired this book with a really short 1-minute video so that you can see that. And if you give me just a second, I will have it up and running. And Anna, please let me know if you can't hear it. This was in rehearsal with 800 high school students, and it was life-changing for them.
Though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will they be able to be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice.
And there is a longer clip on my YouTube site, Gentry Conductor 12, that if you want to see the whole thing in performance, you can. It was very meaningful to me, and I did see a lot of differences in looks in those high school students. Dr. Futrell, Stephen, can we turn to you, and would you kindly tell the audience a little bit about the process of interviewing Paris, how that all came to you, and maybe a couple of highlights with that vocal jazz expert at University of North Texas?
Thanks, and thank you all for being here, and I really appreciate the invitation to share this time with you all. As Dr. Gentry alluded, he had sent to the various interviewers a list of suggested questions to kind of help guide the interview, and then asked us that told us that we could feel free to, depending on the person that we were speaking with, add some questions of our own. And so he asked me to think about vocal jazz, just so that that would be an area and a genre that would be covered. And of course, I guess everybody here probably would go right straight to Steve Zagree, but unfortunately, we lost Stephen. And there's some old school folks like Michelle Weir, Phil Matson, Dave Bardoon, that would be an obvious choice. Then there's a kind of a younger generation, Kate Reed down at University of Miami, where Dr. Gentry is visiting, is outstanding vocal pedagogue, vocal jazz pedagogue, Rosanna Eckert, Carrie Marsh. There's a whole bunch of people, but there's just no doubt that the influence that Paris Rutherford has had in the vocal jazz area is astounding. And over 30-year career, ultimately becoming a Regent Professor Emeritus at UNT. His UNT jazz singers, before Gold Company took over the world at Western Michigan with Zagree, was one of the top vocal jazz groups in the country. And I just thought, well, Paris himself would tell you he's not a singer, but his understanding of the art form, of course, he's a composer, hundreds and hundreds of arrangements. Just check out Hal Leonard, J.W. Pepper. You'll see Paris's name all over the place. His workshops or the presentations at IAGE, of course, it's gone now, and now JEN, J-E-N, Jazz Education Network, are legendary. Just packed house and just fantastic. So to me, it was a no-brainer to choose Paris to interview. and everything from where he came from, how he started, what inspired him to get going. And I think that's the nut of it, right? Is the point of inspiration for all of us and for our students. And he described everything from some of our questions related to comparisons. What's different about a vocal jazz ensemble and a concert choir rehearsal? And interestingly enough, there were tons of similarities because we have to start at that fundamental vocal technique for instance, fundamental vocal technique with the idea of vocal health in mind and the development of that technique. The idea that the more together your technique is, the more expressive you can become as a musician and an artist. And then we got into some of the differences, and most of those are stylistic differences, the tone quality or rhythm, swing, etc., the tight harmony that's in a vocal jazz ensemble, and talked about the importance of warm-ups. Just because it's a pop group doesn't mean you don't warm up. So uh, just some very solid pedagogical practices that Paris employed in that ensemble. And of course, the result uh, is unmistakable, just absolute artistry.
Stephen, he was a professional trombonist as well,
Yes, he
classical
was an
trombonist.
instrumentalist, trombonist, quite an excellent pianist. Um, Took piano lessons as a kid. I think he went to Southern Methodist University. I believe that's what it was. Undergraduate education, and then his master's degree was in composition. And he did some film scoring and writing music for radio along the way. Um, had quite and did a lot of studio work, had quite a varied career, and then landed the job at UNT and took off from there. Um, and to complete the process, after we discussed, we emailed back and forth. He agreed to be interviewed. Sent him the questions ahead of time. We booked a Zoom meeting similar to this,
Mhm.
transcribed the interview, did some edits, and then sent that material in to Dr. Gentry for further editing or questions or reworking some things. And then the chapter was honed down into what is now in the book.
Terrific. Great.
Mhm.
Thank you, Stephen, so much for giving us that introduction. So at this point, I'd like to let you know just a little bit about Dr. Ann Howard Jones and Dr. Hilary Apfelstadt, and then we'll start asking a few questions based on the book. So Dr. Jones is an Iowa native and a Fulbright scholar, and she is known for her many academic accomplishments, particularly at Boston University, as well as her all-important long association with Robert Shaw and the Atlanta Symphony Choruses. Her musicianship, integrity, and this I could not underscore more. Her musicianship, integrity, and influence are present across the country. She continues to mentor students to this day through her numerous academic appointments and her former students, the transformative experiences of musicians under her baton and a generation of enthusiastic concert goers. And to Dr. Hilary Apfelstadt, having held academic positions at the University of Toronto, Ohio State University, University of North Carolina, Greensboro, Canadian Hilary Apfelstadt has published more than 80 articles and reviews on choral conducting, repertoire, pedagogy, and leadership in some of the following: the Choral Journal, the Journal of Music Teacher Education, the Canadian Music Educator, as well as two books and one forthcoming, Conducting Women's Choirs, Strategies for Success, and Wisdom, Wit, and Will, Women Choral Conductors and Their Art, that was compiled by Joan Catoni Conlon. And she's about to have a new book published on women composers. So we thank you very much for both being here today and excited to get into asking a couple questions. So I wanted to start with you, Hilary, and then Anne, if you'd like to pick it up from there. Would you please share one or two events that influenced you to seek a career teaching music? And you can take these questions any direction you want to go.
Okay. I had an amazing high school orchestra teacher who was really inspiring until I met John McDougall. I didn't have any intention of going into music. I grew up in a very musical town in Nova Scotia, 10,000 people, and I think 9,999 of them played some instrument or sang. But still, I was looking at other things. And then we moved to Toronto, and I was in the orchestra, and this man was incredibly inspiring. There was a group of us who went into music. I just wanted to be able to do what he did. And it turned out to be a good decision because I had had so much background. But I'm so grateful to him, to this day.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Anne?
My story is similar. I think it's remarkable that we all follow after excellent teachers. And I had some excellent teachers in my little town of 3,500 people in northern Iowa. But I went to an all-state as a singer, and I found myself asking again and again, I wonder how you get to do what that guy's doing. He was standing up on the stage conducting, and I had no idea what credentials you had to have or what education or who knew whom. I just didn't have any idea, but that question kind of stayed with me. And I thank those teachers vigorously because would you believe in fourth grade, I'm 9 years old, I was sent out in the hall with a group of my peers to learn the music for the next day's church service. And why those kids didn't say, "You're not the boss of me," like they probably would today, gave me courage to maybe I have something to say to music making. And then in high school, just one outstanding experience after another, and those teachers trusted me to take over when they were gone or lead a section rehearsal, and I didn't know anything. I mean, I was a pianist and a singer, and I'd somehow managed. So I think I was led to it. It's vocational for me, probably for you too, Hilary. I don't think I had a great deal of choice, although I did toy with Spanish, teaching Spanish because I had a great Spanish teacher. I thought I could be like she was. However, native speaker, I never could be. But I think it just stayed with me all the way through. And I studied music with all my heart and vigorously all the way through college.
Stephen, what got you into music to be in a director position?
Okay. Well, hate to, you know, go to the personal, but my mom taught piano, church organist, and I'd get home from school and after doing homework and then started watching Gilligan's Island reruns, I would hear piano lessons going on at the same time. And so I also heard her instructions. And of course, she's my mom, so I'm not trying to say she's the greatest piano teacher in the world, but it just started to click with me that, wow, because I could actually hear the students' progress. I heard their questions and how my mom handled answering their questions. She never said, don't do that. She just, if it was a technical issue, she just said, oh, try this technique. But in terms of expression, she never, you know, she never said, don't do that. It was always encouragement and then showing them some proper techniques and whatnot. And then, of course, she would drag me to recitals. Well, then I started to get kind of turned on to the fact that, wow, all this different music coming from 12 pitches, right? And so, sorry to sound apostolic, but music is amazing. And so I thought this is incredible, the diversity of repertoire and seeing how inspirational that was for these students that were learning music and learning how to express themselves. And then to back that up to that end, my junior high and middle school and high school music director, double degree, instrumental and vocal K through 12 from LSU. And he did the jazz band, concert band, choirs at the school where I went. And we did Palestrina, but then we did jazz. So the variety of repertoire again, and just it was all about that kind of point of inspiration. And then in music, the door was always open. Anybody that wanted to participate in music, it brought students together from disparate places on campus or wherever they came from, and that was what turned me on to. I think this is something that I want to be involved with,
Great.
to be with other people in creating something expressive.
Thank you to all three of you. For the second question, there fortunately, I think, are more and more pedagogical sources to help everyone be stronger in rehearsal. But I do believe that hearing from somebody live and in person and watching them work in rehearsal is probably the best way to experience and grow. So I do want to ask, what do you consider, and Dr. Jones, your essences or essence of an effective rehearsal?
I don't think you can overplan. I think I try to sit down with a carefully worked out timing of every event that I'm going to try to pursue with the students. So I know I have a 7-minute warm up and I have a 2-minute introduction to a new piece and whatever it is. And I try to stick to that time. Otherwise, I find, and I think this is a big problem with many, many young people, they never get to the end of the piece and they never are careful enough to be sure that they're covering everything that is needed. So a carefully worked out time. And I always say up to so many minutes, until so many minutes. And then I have a big category at the end of my plan that says if time, so that if I have been more efficient than I thought I could be, or the students were responding more positively, I have a couple of extra things I can throw in. I think pacing is another really important thing that the good rehearsers that I've watched move quickly and effectively from one topic to another with speed, so that the student doesn't have time to relax or think about other things. You're just moving quickly through. And I think people that say, well, now let's see, what should we do next, and act like they haven't figured it out, I think they lose people like me fast. Yeah, and the rehearsal just goes right down the drain. So most of us are lucky to have an hour. Some people have an hour and a half. I want to take great care with using the voice effectively so that I don't wear them out singing forte all the time. And I remember Shaw used to say, and he learned this from Paul Hindemith, who did the string quartets and the collegium at Yale. You don't want to waste vocal gold in rehearsal. You want to save voice as best you can. So a lot of planning to have the high sopranos sing down an octave. And this is trickier for the non-musician than for the musician, because they don't just transpose those octaves like nothing. But after a while, I mean, I think about rehearsing Beethoven 9, sits on that high F sharp for those sopranos forever. And if you rehearse that as much as it needs, you wear them out quickly. So down an octave is fine and they get the idea. Or I used to say soprano 1's up, soprano 2's down an octave, and then swap about halfway through. So everybody gets the experience of finding the proper placement in the voice. And then I think to not get stuck when the bell rings, you're in the middle of something. I think that's an ineffective thing too, but rather to plan carefully so that you're arriving at a climactic point, if you can plan it that carefully, or something that feels like it's an accomplishment by the end of the period. Those are a few things I would say.
Terrific. That's gold. Dr. Apfelstadt?
I'm going to piggyback on what Anne said about planning. I'm also one of those people who maps things out. Keeps me honest, and pacing, and say that good planning and good pacing, I think, lead to progress. For me, if we have together grown understandings about the music in the skills and our musicianship, in our sense of community, and we sound better than we did when we walked in, and made progress, then I think we've had a good role. I think there has to be change. And so I'm always thinking, how can we accomplish this? No matter what the age or the stage, you have to adapt to whomever is in front of you. But those are always my goals, that we will make progress. And I do think that planning and pacing are an integral part of that.
Mm-hmm.
I add one more quick thing. I was
Please.
in a rehearsal of the Cornell College Glee Club on Tuesday, and the conductor is a very skillful guy. And he has a segment about 2 minutes long, right in the middle of everything, where he says, okay, now this is bonding time. Go find somebody you don't know, introduce yourself to them, talk things over, and in 2 minutes be back in your place ready to sing again. And the informality of that was great. 2 of the students in the chorus actually saw me and said, well, who's that person? They came and talked to me. Oh, this is really, but anyway, I think those attempts to break down barriers that we don't even know exist because kids just simply don't know each other is a really useful thing, and it doesn't have to take a long time, and it pays great dividends.
Great. I think Sharon Paul has a book on pedagogy that she talks about that very technique of going out and talking. So it's a good one. This one to Hilary, would you tell us about an experience? Let me start again. In your experience, what creates a successful or an accomplished performance? And if you have one favorite choral performance, if you want to share that, that'd be great. But just walking away from a performance, what that was something you were pleased about? Were you able to catch that?
When I'm counting and listening, I've been.
I can't see Hilary at
Yeah,
all.
she just it signed off and she'll be back in. And do you want to take that, Dr. Jones?
Oh, I'd love to. I had a very difficult time narrowing this because in Boston, Symphony Hall created such an atmosphere that almost anything we took in there sounded fabulous and made an enormous impact. Such a great hall. On campus, we didn't have anything like it. So the performances in Symphony Hall were spectacular. And one in particular, a Verdi Requiem, where Simon Estes, no less, was the bass, was just, wow. I could hardly conduct. I just wanted to stand there and listen. It was so beautiful. And the kids are real singers at BU. And so they loved that Verdi. We also had a fabulous Britain War Requiem that we sang for the Eastern Division one time. And when that piece ended, there was not a sound. You know, it ends on that resolution in F major. And I thought if I were standing there still with my hands up, they would still be sitting there. This was 15 years ago. But there is a sense of giving way to the composer and his or her ideas that I think is helpful. If you can know the piece so well and know your ensemble and the acoustics so well that you can give yourself over to it, there's nothing better.
Awesome.
It probably
Terrific.
saved my life, if the truth be known.
Well, say that again.
Well, good performance, excellent performance, moving performance probably saved my life because I did a St. John Passion right after I got out of the hospital after a stage 4 cancer surgery.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
I was lifted up off the floor. Just amazing. So music has been more than notes and rhythm and pitch and tone. It's a spiritual thing for me.
It's great. I remember after 9/11, I was doing a festival in Battle Hymn of the Republic right after 9/11, North Alabama, and I've never heard an audience make the sound that they did when they heard dun da 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 da. It's just like the en masse. They all stood up. It was really an incredible experience.
Mahler 2 does that too. If you have the chorus sit absolutely stock still at the beginning of Mahler 2, and then that sound Auferstehen comes up out of nowhere, and then when they stand up, the audience is just overwhelmed. That's another one that's very effective.
Oh, that's great. So, Hilary, did you hear the question? Shall I revoice it?
I heard the question and then everything just broke down. I'm sorry about that.
We're getting
what I
your
say
camera.
was that when the musicality,
I was just going to say your camera is
am I
freezing.
there?
We can hear you. The camera freezes.
You can. Oh,
can hear
I
you.
don't know why. Shall I go on? Okay. It's that wonderful expression of musicality when a group is able to convey, in particular in choral music, the meaning of the text. And in addition to accuracy, have that wonderful sense of artistry. I think that always leaves me feeling musically satisfied. And I love the feeling of almost being like a sculptor when I'm conducting, that they're responsive enough to make some changes. So it's rehearsed, but there's still a sense of spontaneity in it. And I'll give you a recent example. The Luther College Nordic Choir was in Columbus on February 2nd. And that performance, you could just sense that church was packed. And these students sang for well over an hour, holding hands as they do, everything memorized. every face so expressive, and you could see the interaction between the conductor and the group. And I just told him afterwards, I said, that was just a balm to the soul. I'm so excited to hear them at ACDA because I expect it will be good, but it will be different. And to me, that is a really wonderfully compelling kind of performance.
Absolutely.
I noticed that neither of you said it had to be adult professional singers.
Oh, no, no. Oh, my goodness. Some of the best things. Unison Children's Choir. It's just exquisite. Yeah.
Stephen, do you recall in your talking with Paris what he considered a successful performance?
I think it's similar to what we've heard. It's vocal jazz, and so he was very concerned with text oftentimes and how it was expressed. It has to sound natural. It's a different approach than, say, singing a classical aria or something, which has its own stylistic features. But the great jazz singers, for example, what really made them great was you were brought into the experience. It was as if you were right across from them, they were telling you a story. And so there's that connection, that communication of the idea. And then they blow you away with either scat singing or long phrases, and they blow you away with just incredible vocal technique. So there's that balance. And I appreciate the question about professional because we're all just awed by the folks that are at the top of their game, so to speak. But yeah, we experience moments of inspiration, like even in class, something can happen when there's that connection, and when all of the students kind of come together, or the singers, or the participants, or the band, or whoever's performing, have some kind of connection, and there's that vibe that everyone is feeding into, and that results into, if you want to call it performance, it's more of an experience. I think sometimes we get so caught up in performance, like the challenge that a high school choral director has. I've got to get these three pieces prepared for MPAs. I've got to go to festival. I got to get these three pieces, got to get these three pieces. And it's almost like, don't worry about the performance. What's the piece about? Are you communicating an idea? Are the kids involved in music making in that classroom? Do they feel like they belong? Have you focused on the individual needs, and then developing compassion within the group? That's what's most important. Is As a professional musician, we want to perform at the top, right? But I'm in this business because of that coming together of all these different folks and creating something together.
Thank you so much to the three of you. Dr. Jones and I had a conversation this morning in preparation, and we had a really great talk. I had asked her, and I've asked Hilary, to both Dr. Apfelstadt, to talk about what they consider important elements that make something a great piece of music. So if I could start with you, Hilary.
Mhm. In terms of choral music, for me, it's the wedding of the text to the music. I'm always drawn by the text, and when I'm choosing music, I will often start with text, almost always. And then I look for a good balance between the craftsmanship and the expressivity. It needs to be well written, needs to be expressive, and some kind of balance between tension and release, so that there's that element of surprise, but also an element of expectation of rhythmic or melodic repetition. You know, if there's too much repetition, it's boring. If there's not enough, it doesn't hold together. But I always in choral music come back to text, I think, and how it's set.
That's great. I hadn't thought about the repetition factor as much. That's wonderful. Dr. Jones, Ann.
Well, last week at the University of Iowa, we hosted, as part of a vocal ensemble residency, which I sponsor, The Crossing, and David Lang, the poet, was here with them. David Lang has a master's degree in composition from this school. And I was really interested because those guys are geniuses. One has won a Pulitzer Prize for The Little Match Girl Passion. The other one has 4 Grammys and just won another one the other week. And they're at the top of their game, and they would always say what you said first, Hilary, that the combination of the text and the music has to be right. And if the words are nonsense, I think the piece loses. Now, we all know there are pieces that are written without text that have just oohing and ahhing. And one of the women in the chorus of The Crossing sang a burial piece. Then she projected the score on the wall up above her, or we wouldn't have believed it, because all it was notated, no text, just that stuff. And by the time it was over, everybody in the room was astonished because we could see what she was doing and what the composer was asking, not a word. So given that there are pieces that are not with text and are still startlingly effective, I just insert that. I think that it's also important to me as a singer that there occasionally be a nice line to sing. And so I think of Sure on the Shining Night of Lauridsen, which has beautiful line, and so many others. But if the altos are doing the standard Handel, and we sing Hallelujah, 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 oh hooray, a change of pitch. Otherwise, it's just filling in the harmony all the way through the piece. I don't think that's particularly genius, but the combination is genius. And the energy is certainly genius, and people are stones if they can't pick that up. So I think given the composer's skill, almost anything can be made effective, I think. And if the composer is not skilled, writes a melody and harmonizes it with stuff that is unsingable, or voice leadings that are impossible. It's like somebody just plunked their hands on a keyboard, wrote those notes down, and then plunked their hands in another place and wrote those notes down, and never thought, how am I going to get that bass from that pitch to that pitch? That's not good technique. That's not good craftsmanship. So I agree with you that if it's well crafted, some of those things are important. Jim Marvin at Harvard and I have spent too many hours talking about the necessity for an occasional bit of counterpoint in a piece of music. He's possessed by counterpoint. He thinks we have too much homophonic music. The great story about the boys in the Harvard Glee Club coming home through the campus from a night of drinking downtown. Probably they were drinking soft drinks, and they stopped by the library and pulled down off the shelf Josquin and proceeded to sing. Of course, imitative polyphony, which those bright minds loved, because everybody had their own voice, their own part, their own rhythm. And most of that's gone from music today, and I regret that very much. And I think it's especially true of contemporary composers who think they can write a melody and harmonize it, and that's that. And I think it doesn't give the underlying voices enough that's interesting to do. I also think music should be challenging. I'm at West High School Tuesday night, and they sang Ted Hearn piece. I never heard anything harder in my life. High school kids all memorized. And they ended with a piece called America Will Be. They sang with such conviction and passion about the prospects for a good life in this country. And in view of I shouldn't say, I will stop. But I think that the challenge is not just in the notes and the rhythm, but also in the concept that the piece is trying to drive home. I think there are a lot of reasons why pieces are good, but there are really good reasons why pieces are bad. And we have a lot of people doing bad music, I think, because they don't know any better. Maybe we haven't done a good enough job giving them a criteria for evaluating, which I used to think was important in choral methods. Why is this piece good? And what goes into your evaluation of it? Sorry, I talked so long. Sorry.
No, that's great. I really concur, I think, with all of that. Yeah, there was something else I was going to follow up with, but I think that's okay. That's a really well said by both of you.
I don't think I said one more thing. David Lang said, sitting there, I'm interviewing these two guys, trying not to appear a fool. And I said, how do you choose a text? Well, simple, he said, if I can't find one I like, I write my own.
Yeah.
And his texts are unbelievable. His new piece, Poor Hymnal, is astonishing. And the audience in the hall was full. It was a terrible night, horribly cold and stormy. People still came. There wasn't a sound in that room for 25 minutes of that piece. People were just mesmerized.
Amazing.
Simple,
But
simple.
I know what I was going to say in follow-up is I didn't hear you say it has to be Brahms or Verdi or a spiritual arrangement by Stacey Gibbs or Illuminari by Elaine Hagenberg. I don't hear that. I hear that there are specific elements that any age level piece
Well,
need to have.
I believe we should go look back once in a while too, remind ourselves where we came from.
Very good. For the next one, if this could be an hour, 2 hour, 3 hour discussion, but if you could share with us one thing that you have found over time that has helped you with longevity, good health, and or career happiness or satisfaction, one or two things that just tips, because I think everybody that's in this room would say this is a hard profession at times, if not all the time. So just some things that were tips or tricks for you that have been helpful to sustain this wonderful career. And let's go with Hilary.
I have good genes. I'm very fortunate to have good genes. Um, I am not like Anne, who swims every day, but I do like to walk. But I know that I think to be happy and to be successful, we have to be in good health. And for me, part of longevity has to do with, what you put in your body and how much sleep you get and those really fundamental things. I haven't always lived up to that. When my children were small, who had time to sleep? But over time, I've learned, and one lesson that I have learned is that no is a complete sentence. So
Good.
that also took decades, but I now impart that wisdom to former students who ask, because I think that we, in our profession, many of us are type A plus. We think we have to be on the go all the time,
Yeah.
and to achieve success in academia, one has to lengthen their list on the CV, and that means you're always looking for the next gig. That's exhausting. It's really, really exhausting. I wish more people would bloom where they're planted. And I say this both about my colleagues and about some former students I've had. We don't always end up at that job that we aspire to, but there's so many things we can do right where we are. And I think it would help our longevity, it would help our health to realize that wherever we end up, we can make a difference and just get busy and do it. Sometimes we're spending energy worrying about what we don't have rather than thinking about what we do. I know that's simplistic, but more and more in my life, I see that there's a sense of entitlement, and you have to put in the time, but put it in wherever you have the opportunity, because you can make such a difference anywhere. I started teaching elementary music, and of course, my plans were to be the world's best high school teacher, but that's not what happened. And it was the best teaching experience I could ever have in terms of preparing me for my career. I learned how to present things in digestible chunks in a way that the children could understand. So later, when I was working with community choirs or church choirs or workshops where people didn't have a lot of background, I used adult language, but it was those simple concepts. And I never would have learned that if I hadn't taught elementary music. So that's a long answer to a short question. Sorry.
Boy, a number of things really great, but bloom where you're planted, that stands out for me. Anne, how about you?
I think I listened to Donald Nally, who admittedly is quirky. He was in a situation 15 years ago. Was that too kind?
Yeah, that's kind.
He
It's
was in
good.
a situation where he was unhappy and unsatisfied, quit everything, found a friend that had a log cabin, and spent 1 year by himself in a log cabin contemplating life. I asked him if it changed him. He said yes, he thought it did. And I think Bloom Where You Planted is absolutely wonderful. Sometimes situations are toxic. And I've advised students not to stay in a place where every force, their faculty colleagues, the administration, the budget, everything was working against them, and it wasn't their fault. And so you can probably tick off the 2 or 3 examples that I'm thinking of, because these are really egregious problems. And in one case, the person was broken and he's a talented musician. So stuff can happen that you don't necessarily bring upon yourself. There might have been a person before you that set up circumstances that weren't good. There might be somebody who's jealous for your job, who didn't get the job when it was open, etc. And all of that stuff gets weighed. And when people are inexperienced, they don't quite know. And then when the administrator is on the other side, this is especially difficult. So sometimes you have to know to get out. And that's a wise, mature decision to make. It's always complicated. Family always enters into it, and it's very difficult. The same person I was talking about going to Cornell, his wife is a very lovely Montessori school teacher. The Montessori school in this part of Iowa shutting down. So she got laid off.
Oh boy.
And he said, they have 3 young children. The 2 little girls are able to go to the Montessori school to preschool, $40,000 in childcare later. They're faced with what to do about giving them an opportunity that they had only because of that Montessori school. This kind of stuff is happening all over the place. So I said to him, are you going to consider moving? No, my parents are here with the kids, yada, yada, yada. So there are thousands of reasons why people stay in jobs when bad stuff happens, but we're strong and we have saleable skills. So he does a church choir in Iowa City. He does the college job, etc. You can find work. I think I would say one more thing. I agree with everything you said, Hilary. I think there's one more thing, and that is avoid getting into situations where you're continuing the gossip about your colleagues. Don't go in the coffee shop. Don't hang around the mailroom. Don't be in those places where that kind of stuff gets going and gets festering. I think it's better if you mind your own business and do your work. And I always also thought it was, this sounds a little manipulative, but I also thought it was important to know who your boss was. Is the chairman of the voice faculty your boss? Or is it the provost or the dean? Or where's the line of authority? Because you might need help. And it's really important to keep your voice colleagues with you because they are the source of your influence. And if they disagree with what you're doing, that's tough. So I used to say if somebody was particularly irksome, I would say, why don't you come and do the warm-ups at the next rehearsal? So you can see what they're doing and how or come and watch me do the warm-ups and then let's talk afterwards and see if you've got some suggestions. Make yourself open to whatever the circumstance requires or demands. And I think support your colleagues as best you can. And sometimes it means putting on a brave face, but it always is valuable, even in town. I go to the high school choir concerts in Iowa City. They're all Lutheran graduates, incidentally, conducting those concerts. So it's a remarkable situation, but I go and I want them to see me. They don't see anybody else from the university, but they see me. And I think that support through the community is really important. So I would say that too. I think it's complicated. If you're going to survive and not just worry yourself into an early grave, you got to pay attention to some of that quality of life stuff. Then I would say one more thing. Be mindful of your gesture, because if you conduct with your shoulders high all the time, this joint is going to wear out, and pretty soon you can't raise your arm over your head. And I think to examine how much are your legs involved. Do you bend your knees with every downbeat? All of that stuff, I'll pay for your chiropractor, but you're going to need one. Be still. Let the gesture be in your arms and in the space where the students or the musicians breathe. That'll serve you well and keep your shoulders disengaged. Important.
Great. Fantastic. Dr. Apfelstadt, what are your concerns for the future of the arts and specifically choral singing?
Oh, gosh.
Right now, I am frankly very worried about some changes that are taking place. I think we have to be particularly resilient. We have, I think, in the last 5 years made great strides in terms of DEI and those kinds of things. And now we have to we have to regroup and we have to fight that again in harder circumstances. I do think that something that will help us in the choral area that we've already begun is to broaden our definition, if you will, of what constitutes choral music. There are people who love to go to beer choir. There are people who go to choir, which is kind of a pop thing. In Columbus, we have the Harmony Project where 500 people will sing. They learn everything by ear and they sing. I hope there will always be a place for the crossing and Vaches Aid and all those kinds of things. But I think that we need to kind of open the doors wider, and in that way we may engage more people and we may be able to get more funding and support in those ways. We certainly can't count on government support.
Does the national endowment still exist?
About grants and all kinds of things. You know, in Canada, there's still a good amount of support that comes from the Canada Council, both to individual artists and to groups. We don't have really, I mean, there's the National Endowment of the Arts, but that's already come under attack. So I think we're in a difficult spot, but I think that being resilient as we are and really believing in the importance of this, it's really about community building.
So
Whatever the kind of community is bringing people together, whether it's for its healing benefits or whatever, you know, is it a palliative care choir? Is it a hospice choir? We have to make sure that everybody knows that all of those options are out there and that we support them.
Amen. I live at a retirement village and it's a huge place, 500, 600 residents, and we have a choir that the music therapists run. Some of the people can't see, some of the people walk, some of them can't, mostly they can hear, but they don't sound very good. 65 people come to a rehearsal every week. They leave smiling. So
yes.
Care if it's music or therapy, but whatever it is, it's doing a very, very good job. And they get invited around the country to come and show up because there are so many places like this that don't have music at all.
Right.
And I think it works on the soul, and we've forgotten about the soul in the schools, I think, to some extent. Anyway, are you finished with what you were going to say? I'm butting in.
No, I agree completely with that. And what you're talking about is building that community. There's one here that's not far from me. And, you know, so many of the people, is it an excellent choral performance? No, not in terms of, but that's not the point. It's what it's doing for their souls and their spirits and their community and giving them purpose. And they're there every week, 30 minutes early.
Absolutely right.
You can't argue with that.
Music, and the woman who conducts it is a music therapist, and she's a genius. She just love her, and she's funny and effective, and nothing's out of bounds.
Yeah.
So it's just wonderful to watch it. I don't really have anything else to say. I think that I was distressed in Cincinnati when that piece got performed where we all shot each other. I don't know if you remember. I thought, what? I don't need my face pushed in it at a national convention. And I regret very much that music was chosen for that performance. But I think this is another thing, that the taste and the responsibility of the chooser of the literature has a big responsibility to help us through this. And the students don't know enough to make the choices themselves. So I'm for more reading sessions and more literature sessions and more exposure to new music. And I think it's probably all happening. I'm just not privy to it now. But I think it's hard to find literature that will sustain these kinds of ideals that you're talking about. And we need it. And maybe this is why we always have to spend a little time with Bach and Haydn and Mozart, and, you know, to get us back to the core of our art, rather than these hot modern pieces that everybody seems to think the students want. Just one quick example. There's a school called Jonesboro High School in Georgia, just south of the Atlanta airport, where all the Delta employees' kids go. And it's a blue collar place. And one year, oh, this is 40 years ago, 50 maybe, the teacher said, I want us to learn Jesu meine Freude this year. And those kids looked at her, what language is that? German. Well, you can't speak German. Well, you're going to learn. And she proceeded, have one German meal a week, took them to a German household where German was being spoken, immerse those kids in that milieu. By the time the year is over, what piece would you like to sing for commencement? Well, Jesu meine Freude, of course. It was a complete sell, and the kids bought it because the teacher was convicted, the music held up. It was a substantial investment on everybody's part, and it did its job. So I'm for some of that too.
You made me think too, when the two of you were talking about the Google Orchestra in Seattle as a community building, they have an orchestra of engineers that is substantial. It's a really good orchestra. And then also in choral, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Donald Brenninger, I think, is doing that choir at the Jet Propulsion. So there are things like that that are appearing now that I'm really hopeful for the future. That is really great.
Well, didn't we always used to have manufacturing plants had choruses? And in the 20s and 30s, and somehow that all went away. But I think there's a big culture for that, and we sing here in Iowa. We have all kinds of singing going on all the time, and I hope it continues.
I think that's great. Well, I would like to close here and say, I hope you will join me at the ACDA National Convention in Dallas to hear more from two other guests from the book In Search of Inspiration. And that's Dr. Andre Thomas and this year's Robert Shaw designee, Dr. Charlene Archibek. And the session is called Conversations with Choral Pioneers. And it's to be Friday afternoon at noon at the National Convention. I want to thank Stephen Futrell and Ann Howard Jones and Hilary Apfelstadt for joining us today. Give you a big round of applause. It's been a great discussion. And I would like to invite you to read the book In Search of Inspiration. It's available through the GIA website, and their website is giamusic.com. And then closing, a very strong and special thank you to Brian Gibson, Alec Harrison, and all of the staff at GIA Music for sponsoring this webinar. We really appreciate your support of the choral art. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gregory, and the panelists. This has been lovely. I really enjoyed the conversation.